Welcome to another edition of MPSE Designing the Game Cinematic. My name is Eric Marks, Vice President of the MPSE, and I am joined today, I'm so honored to be joined by the audio director and lead composer of Halo Combat Evolved, Marty O'Donnell. Marty, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Eric, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to talking to somebody who's got some movie background along with game interests. So let's get the party started. Sounds great.
Thank you. Well, we'll do a quick, explanation of Halo Combat Evolved for those who, for some reason, don't know about this game or just need a refresher. The fall of 2001 was one of the most exciting times in the entire history of games, as fans witnessed the launch of not one, but two new home consoles. One of those consoles was Microsoft's first ever dedicated game console, the first iteration of the Xbox. A big reason most gamers were excited about the Xbox was a flagship launch title that had everyone itching to play it, Halo Combat Evolved, which was being developed by a studio called Bungie. Over 22 years later, it's hard to quantify the anticipation for this awe-inspiring first-person shooter, but it was very palpable among millions of fans worldwide. There were so many revolutionary aspects to this game: silky smooth first-person shooter gameplay on a console, jaw-dropping graphics, a rich and deep sci-fi universe, seamless land multiplayer gameplay, and the ability to hop into and out of land and air vehicles and pilot them yourself. Two key aspects of this game that elevated the experience and stuck with us long after the end credits were the iconic, evocative music, as well as the detailed and unique sound design. The first Halo earned a 97 out of 100 Metacritic score and received reviews such as this one from Edge magazine: the most important launch game for any console ever. GameSpot called it easily one of the best shooters ever on any platform. The game went on to sell 5.5 million copies. It won more than 40 awards, and its success inspired 9 sequels, as well as 3 live-action shows. Today, Halo's legacy is stronger than ever, as it's still the flagship Microsoft game series for current Xbox consoles over 2 decades into the series. Now it's time to look back on the incredible sound and music work in the closing cinematic of Halo Combat Evolved, one of the most important games ever made. All right, without further ado, Marty, I know it's a lot, but it's important that fans know about what this game means to everyone. And what we're going to do now is we're going to play through this closing cinematic from the game, and then we'll talk about your work on it.
Okay, sounds great.
Here we go.
Up ahead, there's a gap in the trench. At top speed, we should be able to clear it.
Here we go.
Shut them down. We'll need them later. Fancy a look?
Did anyone else make it?
Scanning. Just dust and echoes. We're all that's left. We did what we had to do for Earth. An entire Covenant armada obliterated, and the Flood. We had no choice. Halo, it's finished.
No. I think we're just getting started.
Wow.
Oh,
Pretty special.
there was still some more notes left in the black, because so many people forget to keep the recordings going in the black.
Oh, it's so special to see you kind of live orchestrating as well, Marty, after all these years.
Well, it's great to see that again, actually. It's been a while.
It still, I think, holds all the emotional impact and significance. It's really pretty special. Marty, why don't we start with this? How did you come aboard this game to be both the composer and the audio director, overseeing all sound effects, dialogue, as well as music for this game?
Well, I got involved in, I've always been a gamer, but there was no reason for me to be in the game industry back when I started in music and audio for TV. So I started back in like 82, 83. Hooked up with Mike Salvatore, and we did commercials and TV scores and stuff for many years. About 1993, I was able to have an opportunity to work on Riven, the sequel to Myst, and do mostly sound design for that. I worked a little bit on some music with Robin Miller. But at that point, it was because I saw that games had become more cinematic in terms of their aesthetic. You didn't have to have 8-bit mono MIDI chips playing back music and audio. So when I saw that the technology had opened up, I thought this would be a great place to I thought maybe I was a little late. I thought I might be late to the party. So in 1996, I met the guys at Bungie. I started working on some of their some of their titles, Myth, The Fallen Lords, and then Oni. And Halo just was one of the things that was the next logical thing that they started working on. We started working on it, I believe, in maybe end of 1998, early 1999. And so I had already been working with the guys at Bungie as audio director, although this is a little known fact, is the term audio director I coined. So,
Wow.
And I kept trying to push everybody to understand, no, I'm audio director. And then I'd wait to see if they would, challenge me on that. Because as you probably know, in the movie and television business, there is no such role. There is nobody who's an audio director.
Mm-hmm.
And my father was a film director. So I grew up thinking, well, that's the guy to be. You want to be
Wow.
the director. But because I was in audio and music, I loved that more than anything, and that was what my degree was in, and that my business was. I could never be audio director on any of the projects I did for film and television because there were already so many different roles, and there was no role called audio director. So when I found that I could do work in the game industry, and it was relatively, the Wild West, I thought, what these guys really need is someone who's audio director, which to me means everything that's audio, sound, voice, mix, music, everything is the audio director's responsibility. Doesn't mean that that person does everything, but that person is responsible for all audio. And you will never find in the movie or TV business a single person who is responsible for all the audio. If there is such a person, it's usually the director. But I see the director or the creative director as the primary visionary, and then below that person are the other directors: art director, tech director, design director, and audio director. Come on, I'm pushing myself up there.
Yeah.
So that's how I got that. And, you know, because I was the oldest person on the team, I just thought, yeah, I need to be this person. I need to be the audio director. And I just waited to see if people would accept that. And they did. So that's how I got to be audio director. That was a long answer to your question. But there you
No,
go.
I have to ask, Marty, because like it's such an interesting career path and experience that led you to this role on this really important title in the history of games. Like, how challenging was it for you to make the leap to games? So like you were working in advertising for over 10 years, and then you start working on games, and then you work all the way up to and past this important title. I was just curious, like, how that experience helped you, or working in ads before games.
Well, when we got our first gig in the advertising world, there's no straight line to how you get something like that. There was some very interesting, convoluted path for that to happen. I had gotten my master's in music composition. I hooked up with Mike Salvatore, who is a self-taught guitar player, has his own band, decided to build his own recording studio in the suburbs of Chicago. He was a friend of mine. We were in rival bands during my college days. When I came back from USC and I moved back to Chicago, I got an opportunity because I was working on a set. I was actually working as a grip on a film set because I needed work. And through a couple of sort of lucky breaks, but you sort of make your own breaks. Basically, you just try to be in the right place at the right time. We had this opportunity to do music for a TV commercial, and I had no equipment. I had no way of doing anything, but I immediately agreed, yes, I can do this. And so I called my friend Mike up because I knew he had a recording studio, and I said, Mike, I'll split this money with you. I got a gig to do a TV commercial. And he's like, yeah, come on over.
Wow.
So that's how that happened. We did a bunch of demos that night. He had some equipment that was left there by a band who was recording in his studio. So we had a Roland TR-808 and a Casio keyboard, and I don't know what else. So that's what we did. We had what was available to us. We put some cool stuff together. I brought it into the client, and they're like, yeah. And that was probably like on a Wednesday or a Thursday. And by Sunday, I was watching our commercial with our music on it play during the Bears game.
Wow.
And I'm like, this is the greatest thing ever. This is the career I want. So I kept doing it. I kept figuring out how to get more of those kinds of jobs and figured out what the industry in Chicago was like. And we did that for a long time, a good 15-year run, maybe almost 20 years probably, because it overlapped with games. But by the time Myst came out, which was, like I said, I always enjoyed playing games. When Myst came out, I saw that games actually had a bunch of potential that needed cinematic Foley, cinematic music, real actors. And I thought, okay, let me figure out how to get into that. So that's when I made the switch.
That's amazing.
I had to sort of wait for the technology to catch up with what I wanted to be able to provide. So that's what I did.
That's fascinating. All right, we can play the video again from the beginning, maybe at a lower volume, and we'll keep talking. So after you came aboard this project, Marty, and you got kind of a sense of, you've been working with Bungie on a couple of projects. You started on Halo. As you came aboard, you got a sense of it. Like, what were some of your overall creative goals on this game?
Well, here's what I love about this particular captured video is this is not the final cutscene. This is somebody's playing this. Mm-hmm. This is gameplay. It's captured gameplay. So right there, you heard there's a music track playing, and then you heard a stinger. And that stinger only plays when you make that jump. So if you had crashed a couple of times, the stinger would play in a different spot of the music. So the music is playing in a random looping way, and this person is not driving as good as some of the people I've seen driving.
Not the best
right
example.
here,
Yeah.
they get out and they're seamlessly out. The music is still going, but at this point, I know that they are about to trigger the end that transitions into the actual linear part of the cutscene, which happens right there. And that's how I know that I need to come to an end and overlap it with the music that scores the cinematic. So
Let's pause
that's,
there.
to me, as an aesthetic, what was always frustrating to me about games is the games that I was playing, was it might feel really cool while you're playing the game, and then suddenly you would reach a point and the entire screen would go dark. Everything would go silent. You might even see a little loading wheel, and then a cutscene would come up that was pre-rendered, and then you were suddenly, you're just watching a pre-rendered cutscene. And our aesthetic and had developed for a couple of years before this, was that we wanted the gameplay going into cinematic moments to be seamless, so that the player would continue to feel like, I'm Master Chief driving this warthog. Cortana's yelling at me. Things are happening. I need to run. I get out. I'm the one running, and then transitions into this cutscene where now we're in control of Master Chief. But we don't break the player's immersion by stopping anything. It just seamlessly goes. The music sounds like it scores the entire thing. There's no pause. And at that time, nobody was doing that. Almost nobody was doing that. I can hardly think of anybody who spent the time and energy to actually make that happen. As an aesthetic, that was really important to me. I felt like that is the kind of thing that keeps people engaged in the game and the story. So that's a great example of how that works. The official cutscene starts at that sort of white flash of crossfade that starts to bring Master Chief into the ship here before he flies away. And then from that point on, it's a linear movie. But the nice thing about this linear movie is we're actually using its real-time gameplay assets. It's like happening in the engine. So it's not suddenly, wow, everything's up-resed and it looks so much better, and Blur Studios just made it. It's not a movie. It's actually the same models and polygons and lighting and everything that you just were experiencing. So that was very important to us.
That's a great point too about this era in games where there were cinematics that would get outsourced somewhere, and they would look and feel completely different from the game. And you created something here where, immersion immediately stands out to me throughout the game in every aspect. I think you've achieved that in spades across the gameplay as well as cinematics and the blend in between the two.
Thanks. And all I was going to say too is that, I've always felt like, hey, we figured it out. Isn't this great? Everybody should do it this way. And to this day, 22 years later, I would say the majority of games don't do that. And maybe it's just a personal preference on my part, but I wish more games did that, because that's the kind of games I enjoy. I enjoy when I don't see loading screens and I don't see a pre-rendered cutscene that looks nothing like what I just experienced. I enjoy this kind of thing. Now, we were able to do that all the way up through, our final iteration, which was Halo Reach. And that was our aesthetic the entire time. We never changed that. So
that's incredible.
The graphics got better, but we kept the seamlessness.
Right. Yeah, but this was a huge technological leap from console games prior to this one. How big was your audio team on this first game in the series?
Well, basically, you're looking at 50% of the audio team. I had just a great audio lead sound design guy named Jay Wineland. He and I were the only two that worked on it right up until, I think when we had, I wish I could remember, but it was a matter of weeks left to finish. And of course, it's a crunch. And we got a guy named Adam Tooze who came in as a intern. So he worked with us just in those last few weeks, and we piled a bunch of stuff on him to do. But for the most part, that team was just me and Jay. My partner Mike Salvatore was back in Chicago, and I would call him up and I'd say, "Hey, I need a bunch of tracks. Here's some music. Add stuff to it. Come up with stuff on your own. Throw it back to me. I'll find out if I can use it and where." And so it was a scramble. But if you look at the credits, it's Jay and me, Adam and Mike Salvatore total. So it was
Wow.
pretty small.
That's really incredible, knowing that how much was on your plate with this title, with between music, dialogue, I imagine casting, Foley, sound design, mixing, multiplayer. I mean, there's so many. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's so much. That's
Well,
quite
it's
impressive.
funny when you the way you started off this whole interview, or you were describing that Halo did this, and this, and I'm like, wow, yeah, we almost cut multiplayer, we almost didn't have co-op, we almost didn't know if we could do this whole system. I mean, so much of that it all came to fruition and was basically successful. That was not a known quantity at the time, right up to the moment we shipped. Even after we shipped, we didn't know if it was all going to work or not. So, it's funny when you have your head down, just pounding away, trying to get this stuff done. You don't even think about, the potential consequences or what the pressure is. You're just trying to do the best you can at all these things. So it's funny to think about.
Yeah, I wanted to ask actually about that because, like, obviously this is, games are a risky business, but this in particular was just a huge technological leap, new game console. There was a lot of pressure. I mean, I imagine that there was a lot of hype around this game and a lot of expectation and excitement. How challenging was the leap for you and your team to a game of this scale, and doing so as like a flagship launch title for a brand new console?
Well, let me just say, I'm glad the pressure wasn't as bad as it could have been, because at least we didn't know that we were going to be the flagship. There were other titles that were marketed very heavily by Microsoft that were, I think the people at Microsoft thought there are other titles that could be the flagship. And Halo was just filling a nice niche to be a first-person shooter. But almost nobody in the business section of Microsoft thought that Halo would be as successful as it ended up being. I have a feeling they never anticipated that Master Chief would be the mascot for the Xbox. That was not a plan. Nobody expected it. So what that meant is that the pressure on us was just to make as good a game as we possibly could, and sort of cross our fingers and hope people liked it and played it for maybe a year. If people are still playing it for a year after, that'd be amazing. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't think the pressure was quite as bad as it could have been. We just had a lot of, we were excited about the new technology. We were excited about being on a new console. And we were just doing the best we could, and, putting out every fire we had and trying to throw as much stuff at the wall as we could. One of the things that I'm proudest of is the fact that this was a real-time Dolby surround sound game. It actually plays in, Dolby surround 5.1, and that technology didn't exist any place until the Xbox, and it was very close. My friend Brian Schmidt, who was in charge of the hardware side and the audio chip and the software that went into the chip and all that stuff, he had told me that the plan was it was going to be a 5.1 system in real time, which I was like, okay, now I'm in. Now I'm ready to do something. And even with like a month or two before the shipping, it was still up in the air whether they would be able to make the deal and make everybody happy on both sides of Microsoft and Dolby, to make sure that everybody's logos were right and everybody's, share of revenue was correct and all that stuff. There was a point where it was like, Brian called me and said, I don't think 5.1's going to make it. And I was just like, no, you have. We were working so hard to make this thing in surround sound. So the fact that it shipped in surround and it's still, I mean, it's still kind of an amazing experience to play Halo and hear it in surround. It's very cool.
Yeah.
That was the first one. I was proud of that.
That's amazing. Let's back it up a few seconds in the video, and then we'll play it through to the end
Sure.
and talk over it. So I have to ask. I mean, I have a lot of questions about the music because this music is just so timeless and awe-inspiring. It's the kind of music that, like, to me, it taps into something in your soul. You know, it really is. It speaks to something really epic and important, and you know, that happens whether you're playing it just while playing the game, or you pop in the soundtrack at the time in your CD player or whatever. But I think it also helps showcase the significance of composed music in games at the time. And we're still seeing the fruits of that in our industry today. So where did you look for inspiration for the music for this game? And, you know, what were some of your musical goals?
Well, you know, I think by this point in my career, I already felt very comfortable with all sorts of styles of music. I felt like, you know, the 3 words that were given to me all the way back in 1999 when we did our first demo at Macworld with Steve Jobs was the music needs to make the audience feel like this is epic, ancient, and mysterious. And I kept those 3 words in my mind as a composer from the very beginning. And, you know, the monk chant, the Gregorian chant is ancient. So I'm check, ancient. Epic is the drums and the percussion and the chugging cellos and, you know, those screaming strings. And that's felt like an epic orchestra. And the ancient, mysterious stuff is just some of the other material around it, including the vocalization that happens. That sounds like sort of a weird chant melody. Yeah, that guy, which was me.
Wow. I would have no idea.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's me, believe it or not. Not because, well, yeah, I do have an ego, but it's mostly because, like, there was no other place to go. It's like, this is what I think is needed, and I can't hire anybody right now. Like, even the choral music that happens in this scene, that's me, like, at 2 o'clock in the morning, because I realized I needed one more monk-sounding choral piece. And so I just kept running back and forth from the record button into the audio room, because I didn't have a microphone next to my console. And I just layered myself like 100 times. That's my voice. So
wow. So, like, you know, you got that direction from the creative director and the team about music. Was there stuff about the characters and the story and the world of this game that inspired any of your choices while you were making this first game?
Well, I think because I was there at the beginning, I was already working with Bungie on, you know, finishing up Myth 2 Soul Blighter, and I was also working on a game called Oni. It was just like every game came in, and it was like, okay, this is the game that's the sci-fi universe, epic, ancient, mysterious. Oh, over time as it's developing, we realized that first person was better than third person, which was also better than a strategy game. Believe it or not, it started as a strategy game. And we realized this personal story of this guy who originally was just like super soldier or space marine, ended up becoming Master Chief. And I think when Cortana came in as a character, I started to realize how important Cortana was. Truly, I think Cortana is the main character. I think Master Chief might feel like a protagonist, but I don't think from a story standpoint, Master Chief is the protagonist, because he doesn't really do much changing over the course of the series, because you, the player, are Master Chief. We didn't want him to have a whole lot of agency outside of what you are choosing to do. But Cortana, I feel like she was the one that had more interesting story, and she was more of the main character for me. So I think all of that stuff sort of happened organically because I was there with the team, playing the game, seeing how the story was developing. And then I always adapted musically to how I saw the story unfolding and the missions unfolding. So it's very organic. I didn't think through, or I didn't have like, here are the main characters in the game and here are their personalities and write a theme for each. That's just not the way this happened. So it was very organic.
Let's pause it there. Was
Sure.
it challenging for you? I mean, like the scale of this music in this game they were quite striking at the time. Was it challenging for you to convince the rest of the team of some of your musical aspirations for the score? Like, it must have been just a different approach. Like, I don't know how much of this was recorded live or, like just like bigger in scope than other games prior to it, but I was curious about that.
Uh, you know, I had been working with the teams at Bungie for a few years. And when we did orchestral type music before that, it was almost always all sampled. In 1999, we realized we had this opportunity to show this very early version of Halo to the world. And we had no sound engine. The sound engine didn't work yet on a Macintosh. So it was this was a live gameplay demo using the game engine at Macworld with Steve Jobs. So it was like a wonderful opportunity for us. But I'm like, the sound engine doesn't work on a Mac yet. So what are we going to do? And we sat there and talked about it. And I said, well, look, I could, why don't you let me write an orchestral score with like live players, and we'll just put it on a CD and hit play at the same time Jason Jones hits the space bar to start the demo, and just cross our fingers and hope it kind of syncs up in some cool way. But we knew that then the only thing that would be selling the audio side of Halo would be a recorded soundtrack. And that's, the guys at Bungie were like, oh, that sounds like a great idea. Like, how much is that going to cost? And I said, look, I'll own the music. You just pay the expenses of me, the players and the studio. And I think our entire budget was like, $3,600 or something. We had 6-string players, 4 violins, 2 cellos. Mike and I sang the monks, and all the vocals were done by the 2 of us, plus 3 other jingle singers. That I think those jingle singers had just sung Mr. Clean, like 2 days prior for me, because that was one of our things. And then everything else was samples. So we had a lot of samples. It was a hybrid orchestra, and we just tried to make it sound as epic as possible. And so once we had started down that road and it seemed to be appealing to the fans, we knew that that's the direction we were going to keep going. I certainly knew that. I was like, nobody was going to tell me, yeah, we'd rather have an electronic dance score for this thing. But because I was audio director and they pretty much let me do what I thought was best, which was great. I really appreciated that.
That's amazing. Let's back it up. We'll start at the beginning of the video. Let's go all the way back, and we'll play from there. So you mentioned like the interactive elements of the music, like like playing a stinger when something happens in the game, things like that. Like from your perspective, oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, like everything you're seeing, everything that's happening in the audio right now, there's a music track that's got random loops in it. There is a stinger waiting to be played, depending on where you are. But all the other sound is the sound of the engine, the sound of explosions, the flood, the aliens shooting at you. That's all happening in engine and is all like positional audio from the game. So this is gameplay audio live happening right up until we transition into the cutscene.
Let's pause it there.
Him running footsteps, those explosions, that's all happening because he's running. Like if this player had decided to stay by the warthog a little bit longer or jump over the barrier and start shooting aliens, that's what would happen. And these explosions wouldn't happen yet. They only happen when they go through what we call trigger volumes. So you trigger these things to happen because you are making a certain amount of progress. And those trigger volumes also trigger the music to know that like the music now knows we're coming to the end, we're about to hit the transition point. I need to hit the climax of the music of this section.
how, like, we're talking, 1999 to 2001 range, like how challenging was this idea of interactive music at the time for you? I mean, this is not a simple loopable score where it just sounds like the same kind of, 80s 8-bit sort of music or something like that.
Right. Well, there were some in the '90s. Like I said, the technology got better. There were other companies, EA, LucasArts especially. Lucas had like a spectacularly cool music system. Um, so I would go to the Game Developers Conference. So I started, I think, in 1996. So this game shipped in 2000. So 2001. So over the course of that 5-year period, I did a few games, and the idea of being able to have music adapt to what the player's doing in real time got more and more mature. So by the time we got to Halo, we had been doing adaptive music for a while. Other game developers and friends of mine that I would meet at GDC, we were doing their kind of adaptive music, and we would trade, um, you know, we would have talks about like, how are you doing it? Well, we're doing it this way. Well, how are you doing it? Well, we're doing it this. How about this? So I would borrow ideas from. It was a very open society. All the composers and sound designers would get together, and we would just share information because nobody was too precious about their proprietary engines. We couldn't share code because all the code was unique to whatever you were making, but we could share concepts, and we did a lot. So this was not at all the only adaptive music that was happening at this time. But we were all pushing the envelope to try to make it more and more responsive.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's move on to. I want to talk obviously a bit about the sound work in this game too, apart from among your audio director responsibilities. So let's keep playing the video. In terms of the rest of the sound of this game and the cinematics, what was your workflow like? Did you start on a cinematic? Was that all done in-house? Was there any sort of like outsourcing or support, or how did you divide up your team's time between like sound work on cinematics versus in-game sounds?
Yeah, I don't think we had any outsourcing on this game. I think we did. We had some people we knew that might have helped us outsource on some of the cinematic sound effects for Halo 2. I think we might have started, but I believe everything here was just me and Jay. So, and then here, if you listen to the flood, that's me. So I'm the voice of the flood.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
And it's one of those little tricks that I've always known. All you have to do is make noises breathing in, and it's monster noises, and you can pitch those down and up and do crazy things with it. But
wow.
Once again, it's just like, all right, we need some sort of ugly noises for flood. I'll go in the booth and do something. So there was a lot of seat of the pants Foley and sound effects creation, and the technology of getting this stuff all working in sync and not getting repetitive and boring. That was the most important thing. And I would also say you said a word that's like unbelievably important in film and television, which is the mix. Doing a final mix is the climax of any film work. Or TV work. It's like the final mix. That's when everybody shows up and this is the final thing. In the game world, nobody even knew what a final mix was. So I would have to say, guys, we can't, you got to give me time to do a final mix, because bringing all these elements together and knowing that they actually are balanced the right way, and the voice is up front when it needs to be, and the sound effects are here or there, or the music is swelling when it needs. That final mix was not easy to do, because in order to do the final mix, you actually are physically playing a game and trying to make changes to these what we called sound tags, or the sound files. The volume of the sound and how they're played back and how they're mixed was, that was such a panic. I felt like I needed another month on Halo. I was so depressed when we shipped it because I felt, oh, it's like so far from being polished. I just thought it was so far from being polished
Wow.
because we had no time. So when I actually played the shipping version of the game, I was like, I wasn't so close to it anymore. I heard it in my home theater at my house, and I'm playing the actual retail version of the game, and I'm like, well, this isn't too bad. This actually sounds more polished than I remember. So, but I forget what your original question was, but that was pretty
Yeah,
amazing.
just sort of about like dividing up resources. So I like obviously there was a lot on your plate and your team's plate, and yeah, I imagine that had to be incredibly challenging. And like, how did you go about like dividing up your time on a project like this with such a small team?
Well, I mean, Jay was primarily responsible for sound effects. I was primarily responsible for music, casting, directing voice, and but we worked together. The two of us worked together like really well. So, we both worked on the Warthog engine. And I remember Jay came up with a system and we were trying to tune the engine as you rev the engine. And, we had, try to tune the engine sound in Sense, which is the way you tune music. And I did some of the gun sounds and he did most of them. And, it was a great partnership. I was the one doing the majority of the music, and then I would have Mike Salvatore in Chicago do more music and have him send it to me, and then I was implementing everything. And one of the things, I know this is going to be hard to believe, but one of the things that we didn't get around to doing because we couldn't were all the cinematics. There were 33 what we call cinematics in the game, which are these scripted moments like this last one here. That the technology of making those custom animation, custom scripting to make the cinematics do what it needs to do, and the camera cuts here and the close-up on Master Chief and a shot of the outside and all that stuff, we had proven that we could do that, but we didn't have it. It wasn't working yet in engine. And we had storyboards. We knew what was probably coming down the pike, but we as audio guys couldn't do anything in sync to it because it wasn't working in the engine yet. And it finally, Joe Staten, who was in charge of scripting the cinematic moments, he was also the writer on the game, basically said, okay, all the cinematics are in, they're ready to go. And we had 3 days to do all the scoring and Foley and sound design and mix for the cinematics.
Wow.
And by the way, I if you want to know what my most memorable moment is on Halo 1, it was that we had 3 days to do it. I said to Jay, okay, Jay, you do the sound effects for the cinematics. I'm going to do the music for it, and then we'll get together and combine it at the end of the day, see where we are. We got 3 days. There's 33. We got to finish 11 a day.
My God.
And the first day, we finished 11. And we put them together. And it's like, this is working. We're right on schedule. We're going to be fine. The next day was September 11th, 2001.
Oh.
Yeah. And I mean, we were so narrowly focused that we almost were like, yeah, whatever. It's like, and I remember coming in, I actually came in because I watched what happened on September 11th. I was mortified. And I got a call from Jay. He was at work doing something. And I'm like, Jay, why are you at work? And he goes, why? What's going on? And so, I remember going in and then seeing a bunch of the guys in a conference room figuring out how to finish the game. And I said, guys, I don't care what's going on. I'm going back home. I'm going to be with my family. The world is changing today. And you need to stop thinking the most important thing is finishing this game. And so I left. They left. By the end of the day, we were like, okay, somebody's got to give us more time to finish this game because this is ridiculous. I think we got an extra day. So I was like, well, I'm not going to let the terrorists defeat us. So we all came back to work on September 12th. And then I did another 11 cinematics on the 12th and another 11 on the 13th. And that's how we finished up.
Wow. Yeah, I remember
Yeah.
that September
True story.
11th was a Tuesday. So I guess you started on a Monday and wow.
Yeah.
Um,
No, it was you know, you there things happen in the world and you go, okay, this is just a video game. This is not life and death. This is not the most important thing. But we were almost blind to what was happening outside of our world. So
wow. Um, so we stopped at this frame here because I want to talk a
yeah,
little about voice acting, casting, directing, dialogue. I mean, this is the start of a franchise. I mean, who knows what the success would have been while you were actually working on it, but this turned into a very
no,
big, huge
yeah.
franchise. I mean, Cortana is now the voice of Microsoft. Um, so, what was the process like for you, especially at a time in 2001 or before then, that where dialogue in games was still kind of coming into its own, and it was a pretty new, growing part of the craft.
Well, I had shipped a few games by this point and had hired quite a few actors, and I had worked, of course, in Chicago, and I knew tons of Chicago voice actors. And now we moved to Seattle. We were all working in Redmond, Washington, and I thought, well, I should just hire local talent only here. And so we had a casting session. That's where I met Jen Taylor, who's the voice of Cortana. And she came in and she just was so much fun to work with. Her voice was so perfect. She could do anything. She did a British accent. She did, she sounded like a gypsy. I mean, whatever we wanted, she was doing. So I knew we had Jen. And then we had a guy who had a pretty good gruff voice, it was pretty cool. And I thought, well, he's going to be a good Master Chief. But at some point, I remember thinking, there's this guy back in Chicago who's an actor that I worked with on a game called Subterracore, which was just the prior year, and his name is Steve Downs. He's also a disc jockey, and I think his voice is perfect for Master Chief. So I called up Steve's agent, and Steve was like, like Steve talks about it to this day. It's like the only job he didn't audition for was Master Chief. Because I just woke up thinking, no, I should hire Steve Downs again because I've worked with him and he was the perfect voice. So that was kind of a big deal for me because I didn't plan on ever flying back to Chicago to do voice work. But that's where I hired Steve Downs as Master Chief. Pete Stacker became, he did two voices for me. He did the AI character named Sergeant Stacker, who's wonderful. And he also was Captain Keyes. And then I hired Tim Dodabo to be 343 Guilty Spark. So I had three solid actors from Chicago, and I got their voices done there. Went back to Seattle, and little did I remember, I had not realized that the gruff voice guy in Seattle had been told by his agent that he had won the part of the main character, Master Chief. And his name was Jeff Steitzer. And I'm like, oh, wow. Well, Jeff would be perfect as the multiplayer voice. So we brought Jeff in, and I apologized. I said, yeah, but I think Jay said to him, Jeff, your voice will be heard more in multiplayer than any other actor. And he says, okay. And so he's the one who killed Tacular. He did all those ones. And,
Yeah.
So it all worked out great. But so Jen and Jeff were actors from Seattle, and Steve Downs was from Chicago. And what's fun is we finished Halo. I don't think it was until, I think Jen and Steve never actually physically met each other and were in the same studio at the same time until 2011.
Wow.
So I was there when they met each other. It was a PAX conference, and they met each other in person. Everything was done separate studios, and we put it together in the mix. So
And then
and now they actually go around. They tour together. They go to different shows, and the Jen and Steve show, Master Chief and Cortana show, which is great. They're really fun to watch together.
that's amazing. And then so the
Yeah.
recording happened at these studios. Would they send you the raw recordings, and you all would do the dialogue editing and mastering in-house and integration?
Yep. Yeah. All of that. Yeah.
Wow.
And I was at every session, so I was the director of the voices. And I have a very specific way I like to direct actors. Certainly, number one is, to me, the casting is the most important part. So if you have a really good actor, then the directing is like butter. It's so simple because you don't want to ever read a voice line to an actor. And even if you have a way you think it should sound in your head, a good actor is going to give you a performance that's better than you could imagine. And so I recorded every take they took. I never made a decision like, yes, take 3. That's the only one I want. I mean, I took everything. So when I went back to implement this stuff, I would listen to it again with fresh ears and say, yeah, the first take was the best, or the 7th take was the best, or whatever. Sometimes, as it is, take 1, the middle of take 3, and the end of take 7, and you put that together. So
That's so interesting.
there was a lot of hands-on work.
Wow, I can only imagine with that size team. Let's keep playing. So you mentioned in the cinematics like this that it was all in-game assets used. Were there ever times in this game where you would cut in sweeteners under sounds in the cinematics, or was it all things that were repurposed and reused?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. The cinematics couldn't play because the scripted events in the cinematics were all the animated and camera moves and all that, but the sound engine no longer worked inside a cinematic moment. So the sound of footsteps that we used in the game were probably the same sounds that we used in the cinematics, but we had to sync those sounds up like traditional linear media. So we didn't think of them as sweeteners. It's like when we got to the cinematics, you had to sound design the cinematic like you would do a normal film.
Okay.
But of course, we wanted the sounds to still be the same sounds you were already used to hearing in the game. And you had a little bit more flexibility because the mix there would be specific to the cinematic, so you could have things sit in the mix exactly where you wanted. But at that point in the cinematic, you had to do all your physical panning in the movie, right? So all the panning was done in the movie, whereas everything inside the gameplay, all of the surround sound and the sound effects and the panning, that was all happening in the engine.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then in the cutscenes in particular, how did you approach things like Foley? Were you recording any of that yourselves? Were you cutting from libraries, or how did you typically approach Master Chief's footsteps here, for instance? We could pause it.
Yeah. Well, since those footsteps were already developed for the game, I am pretty sure we just lifted the footsteps that we had done. We almost never used anything just straight up from a library, but we definitely had a lot of, we would begin with library source a lot of the times. But, and as we went forward in the series, we did more and more live recording. I had already done sound design for Riven, which was the sequel to Myst. I shipped that in '97 and had a Foley, floor and studio, and we did a lot of live Foley to the cinematics. So I like doing live Foley if I needed to. But I don't think we did that much kind of Foley work in Halo, mainly because I think the cinematics were also embedded inside areas of the game. So, we wanted it to just feel like the game is just playing inside this cinematic moment. So we didn't do a lot of Foley, but we did. I know Jay did went into the booth and recorded, smashing cabbage heads and breaking. I remember breaking branches and making that the crunching noises and, crashing noises and stuff. So we threw a lot of our own stuff on top of things that we got from libraries.
We can keep playing. What were some of the biggest challenges you faced while trying to sound design and mix these cinematics? You mentioned the schedule, which is crazy, but I guess outside of that,
crazy.
yeah. Biggest creative or technical challenges of cinematics.
Well, I mean, the biggest problem with especially the Halo 1 engine was it wasn't hard sync. So if it was a 30-second segment and you had a 30-second sound track of Foley, let's say, or of sound design, it could drift over 30 seconds. So by the end of 30 seconds, you might be,
Pause it
10
there.
frames off. Yeah. So what we had to do is we had to come up with a system where we could re-trigger audio files as part of the scripted events in the cinematic. So we would have, sound effects that were 5 seconds track long, and then it would be re-triggered here and it would overlap another 5 seconds or 10 seconds, so
pause
that we
the
knew
video.
that we were basically resyncing all of our important synced sound effects. We were resyncing by restarting, it's just free flowing on the fly sound effects that we knew would work, but could drift over time.
Wow.
Now, it wasn't quite as important on the music side. If you're doing a swell and you miss the moment by 5 frames on either side, it's not that noticeable. But I still would have a music track that would start at the beginning, and then I'd probably do a new music track. I would physically, design it so I would have a crossfade version and another stem that would start here. And I knew that this sync point was good, so that as I went through a long cinematic, we would be in sync by the end and it wouldn't drift that much. But this game, there was some drift, which is, it's playing back in real time. The technology was not designed for hard sync. So we had to come up with a system where we could make it seem like it was all in sync, even though it was just like seat of the pants.
That's
Hope
so
this works.
interesting that you say that, because the first video interview like this that we did was with a sound designer named Jamie Scott, who did all the
Oh, I know Jamie. Yeah,
Oh.
I've known him forever.
Yeah, so he 5 years after this came out, he was doing this, sound design work for Gears of War 1, and said the same thing. 5 years after this, that was still a technical hurdle that he did use the same approach as you're talking about for keeping sync.
Yeah, to this day, it's if you're not in a separate video engine, if it's not a pre-rendered engine where you have basically a movie that just plays back and everything's in sync. If it's trying to play audio separate from video, or especially if you're trying to say, here's the gameplay and here's when the scripted camera control and scripted animation takes over, which is essentially the cinematic, but you have audio coming from the gameplay that needs to keep playing into it as it fades out, you're not going to be in sync. You have to come up with a different way of knowing, sort of handing off these sync points. And I'm pretty sure some of that stuff hasn't been figured out perfectly yet. It's kind of amazing.
Wow. Yeah, 22 years later, you'd think that there'd be some better
You would
systems in
think.
place. I have to ask, Marty, creatively, we stopped in this frame of outer space, and
Oh yeah, here we go.
yeah, so, traditionally in film and TV, as you well know, we're used to things like Star Wars and Star Trek where we hear things in outer space, but you took a very different approach where we don't hear the realistic sounds, we don't hear sounds in space of things happening. I was curious what led to that decision for you.
It's always been a bit of a pet peeve of mine. I'm not like such a physics nut that I believe, I love watching Star Wars, and essentially as you fly through space, it's look like you're flying through the atmosphere, with banking and turning and all this kind of stuff. I don't mind seeing it look like World War I dogfights in space, even though I know it isn't going to be that way. But it always bugged me when if the point of view is space and you're hearing sounds, I'm like, no, it's vacuum. You don't hear sounds in space. And I can't remember if I had to convince some of the guys at Bungie that was the right approach, or if I think the creative director, Jason, just agreed with me, or he might have also felt the same way, that like, yeah, Marty, there's no sound in space. So it was easy. I could do sort of cool things in the music track that kind of cue what's happening. But like, yeah, I didn't want to hear an explosion, especially like if you know how big Halo is, do you know how long, even in an atmosphere, it would take for that sound wave to reach your ears where you are from that explosion? So it would be so delayed, if you were being realistic, that it wouldn't be dramatic. So I felt it was more dramatic just to have the emptiness of space, just the music track, and you just watch what's happening. So I've seen it, like, I think, yeah, believe it or not, I think in the anniversary edition, they went back in on this and they put sound effects in it. And I'm like, what? No, that's not right. I specifically said no sound in space. But anyway, once I left Microsoft and they had the control over things, I was no longer audio director. So
They
I'm
didn't
glad you got
consult
this
you.
version, 'cause that's my preferred version.
Yeah, I think, I mean, to your point, I think the music is so powerful and evocative that it carries all the, audio space you would need for a scene like this. And it's powerful in
Great.
its own right.
Well, I'm glad you like it.
Let's keep playing.
I'm glad you noticed. I mean, some people don't even notice. They don't notice even when they watch these things back to back. It's like they don't notice the difference. So
Yeah. No, I definitely did. So, you talked about, you and your team and how you approach in-game sounds too. I'd like to ask a couple of questions about that too.
Sure.
To me, the sound design in the game was just really ahead of its time and just supremely well crafted and just very creative. What was your team's approach to creating, for instance, the UI sounds in the game?
We're all that's left.
Well, to me, there's all the realistic sounds. So you want
Entire Covenant Armada
You want
obliterated in the flood.
sounds
We had no
for all the animated things and all the things that are happening to you as a player and around you. You want that to be as absolutely powerful and realistic as you possibly can. You want the music to carry the emotional journey for everything as much as possible. You want the dialogue to seem not annoying. You want, like, the Marines to have new things to say that always surprise you, so they seem like they're living. They're not just robots repeating things. So, you've got your dialogue, you got your music, you got sound design, sound effects. And then you have what I would call the game stuff, like the UI sounds, or maybe very specific, like this is what it sounds like when you pick up this specific ammo. And to a certain extent, that has to be very much immediately speaks to the player so they know what that is. So, like, you're going to start the game, it's just going to go beep, 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 boop. Like, it's just keep it simple. Because you don't want to be, in my aesthetic, you don't want to have the UI sounds to be real complex and crunchy and cool and stuff, because, like, that takes away from what you're going to hear when you're playing the game and everything has to be great. So I just wanted the UI sounds to just speak to you immediately. Okay, the menu's changed. This is a selection. This is very simple. I'm going to start the game. I pick up this specific ammo, and it just speaks to you in sort of the way games should speak to you. And all of that needs to be at a very low, almost subliminal level compared to the, because you don't want a button push on a menu to be as loud as the biggest explosion in the game. And I've actually played games where that happens, where they just, believe it or not, they just normalize everything because they think it sounds great. And the most inane little selection thing that happens in a menu is equally as loud as the coolest part of a cutscene, and that just makes no sense to me at all.
Wow.
So I know I'm complaining about other games, but I have nothing in specific. But those are the kinds of things that I had come across in my times playing a game, and now that I had my hand on all the audio, I knew I could sort of fix that.
Yeah, I mean, like, one thing that stood out to me just right away in this game about the UI and, things like when you'd run out of ammo and your gun would have to recharge, like, everything just sounded very clean, very, it had almost like there was a universe to it all. Like, it all fit in this world. You believed it was part of, the world that Master Chief is walking around in and trying to save. I mean, everything just felt like it was of a different time in the future that was all very unified and really well thought out. So I just really was impressed and loved the UI work that you all did.
Well, thanks, because, I mean, we did care about that a lot. I mean, we really, how we're going to make your shields are low, but it can't be so annoying that you just want to stop playing the game. It just has to tell you my shields are low, and then when you hear your shields recharge, it has to be a simple, straight line directly into your brain. My shields are recharged. I can go run back into battle. You don't want that stuff to be super annoying or complex. You just want it to read for your ears and your brain very fast.
Also, the weapons in this game sounded so impactful and specific, and also were unified, in terms of the in-game universe and technology there. What decisions went into, you all and how you made the weapon sounds for this game?
Well, I mean, you have the humans and the aliens. So we immediately knew that, like, there's a dividing line. So the human weapons are all, explosive and real, and you can relate those weapon sounds to sounds that you already have heard in movies and about. And then on the other side is aliens. So all the alien sounds have to be, what does a plasma bolt sound like? It's weird plasma and weird, there's a light bridge that's made out of light. What does that sound like? Well, that was fun because we could just jump over into the sci-fi world, and like all these things have to sound like they're coming from the same sci-fi family, otherworld, alien, and then everything over here is just hardcore military.
We can pause it
And
here.
it's really about the only, main creative direction that I had on that I gave. I said to Jay, it's like, nope, this got to be over here. It's got to sound more alien. Nope, this has got to sound more earthbound explosion. There's got to be gunpowder involved. So, we didn't want to have too much pew 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 on the alien side. So, Jay did some just beautiful work on those alien weapons. I love how that stuff works.
Yeah, you immediately knew,
There you go.
based on what it sounded like, who was shooting at any time in this game, and that I thought was really impressive, especially for the era.
And by the way, I mean, the technology of actually knowing that we could attach a sound to a plasma bolt that would actually, in real time, 5.1 go past you, and you would hear it go behind you and burn into the wall behind you. I mean, you could almost use mouth noises as long as it was hooked up to those particles and the systems, and they all worked in space, in the spatial location you were at, so that you could turn your head and look, and the sound would do exactly what you thought it should do. That's hugely important. Like, I can't tell you how important it is. It's the content of the sound is important, but then the implementation of how the sound actually travels in the real world, the game world, is equally important. And once we knew that technology was working, and of course, that's our programmers who were geniuses. We loved our programmers. We would always ask them, we need more of this, we need more particles, we need it all spatialized, and they would complain and say, okay. But once it all came together, we were thrilled. So.
Wow. Yeah, it all shines through. I think it's such a great way to the audience. And then in this gameplay section, like the Master Chief just got out of one of the vehicles. You mentioned you had some part in creating the vehicle sounds. Like, what was your approach like to creating sounds for the various vehicles in this game?
Well, I mean, it was the same thing. It was we had a very easy dividing line of. We knew that, like, the terrain always made sound. So whatever vehicles were rolling on terrain, it would change from rock to grass to gravel to concrete or ice or whatever it might be. So we knew the terrain would give audio feedback based on where it was. But then the vehicles themselves had to have their own engine sounds and their own however they were interacting with the terrain sounds. And, all the alien vehicles, they were able to hover, and they had some sort of mysterious engines in them that, did magic things. So we could just come up with, weird sounds that we thought would sound alien and would work for that. And then on the human sound, there were tank treads that were going across gravel, and there were, big giant wheels on the Warthog that had to sound right. And then the engines were still in. I don't know why in the 25th century it's internal combustion engines, but it is. I don't know why they're still using gunpowder, but they are. It worked fine. So those were the two. Once again, those were the two things, and we just kept playing with it. The most important thing for us in all these vehicles was that they would respond to what the player's input was. So the players turning the Banshee, and you better feel like it's, you hear that sound of the Banshee going through the air. You're hovering in the Ghost and hitting things. I remember talking to Jay as we worked on the physics engine and how things responded. I'm like, look, if you've ever heard a real car crash, if you've ever just happened to hear a car crash, it's actually not that exciting. It's kind of dull and thuddy and crunchy. So, and you're like, oh, what happened? Oh, a car crashed. But if you watch a car crash in a movie, it is super exciting. So people's expectations are that, there's glass breaking every time the Warthog hits something. I mean, and I'm like, we made sure that like metal crunching and things flying off and glass breaking and all these great sounds happened with almost every, you could tap a pillar on this last run and you would think, wow, did I just destroy the Warthog? It might be a little over the top, but I always wanted those collisions to feel exciting. And we needed a lot of them. So you never wanted to hear the same collision sound over and over and over. But I always wanted them to be exciting. So I put them in categories. Like depending on the physics of the impact, it would be a small collision, a medium collision, and a large collision. And that's how I approached just about everything. There was 3 layers to just about everything in the game: small, medium, large.
Wow. Do you remember any field recording sessions you all did for this game? Were there any like particular ones that you went out and recorded?
We didn't record weapons on Halo 1 in the field. I think we started doing that with Halo 2 and 3. We had mobile recording rigs starting with Halo 2, but with Halo 1, we were just like in the studio, just making it up as much as we could in the studio. I don't remember. Jay might have a better memory. He might have brought some stuff in. And of course, he had been a sound designer on a lot of games. So I think he had done a lot of, he had done work on Need for Speed.
Okay.
And had done a lot of engine recording on Need for Speed. So I'm almost positive he didn't use any engines from those sessions, but he knew how to record engines and where to find good source. And so, but I don't think we did any mobile recording outside the studio for Halo 1.
So this is obviously like a huge game, a huge experience for you, I imagine, in your career. What kinds of things did you learn from working on this game that sort of helped your process on games after this one?
This was, I think, a milestone for us because everything came together. We were able to pretty much implement and see all these things come together on all these different levels for the first time. And then from that point forward, it was just like, well, what do we need more of? Well, in this area, we were kind of constrained here. We need more of that. I wish we had more technical ability to do this. I wish I had the ability to do more with music and have stems playing and different things inform individual stems so I could do horizontal and vertical and triggering layers and real-time parameter controls over EQ. And we had the basis of everything we wanted for Halo 1. And then we could go look at each system and say, what can we do better on the next one, and then the next one after that. So I don't remember. I to this day, I still feel like we laid the foundations for the future really well, at least in my mind, of all the other stuff we ended up doing all the way through Destiny. So I think you can find the origins of just about every technique starting with Halo 1. So that's pretty satisfying.
So your work on this game, I think it elevated the medium as a whole in many ways. And I was curious, what was your fondest memory of working on this game?
Yeah, I gave you the 9/11 memory, and that's probably not my fondest memory. That's actually one of the most sort of horrific moments. But in terms of just the atmosphere on the team, it was like this was a bunch of young people. I was the old guy at like age 45, which is, by the way, that the reason I was called Marty the Elder is because I was by far the most elder person on the team, and it's fun for me to call these guys now and see them hitting their 50s, and I'm like laughing. But because they all thought I was just ancient. Not only I was well into my 40s working with them. So, but there was a camaraderie in that team. It was especially with Halo 1. I think the development team was around 30 people. Which means we all knew each other. We all knew each other's families, if there was family. We all pulled together. We were all doing this thing that, there were some expectations, but there was no real expectations. We didn't even know if the Xbox was going to sell, let alone whether Halo would be popular. So it was just when I think about that period, just getting a little time to play multiplayer with the other folks on the team. We just thought we were so good because we were the first ones in the world to be playing these multiplayer maps against each other. And, we would get together in rooms. We'd play 16-player co-op or 16-player multiplayer. We'd play 2-player co-op. We had to try. We were the testers. There was a crew of testers, and sometimes the testers would actually come in and just play along with us because they were right down the hall. So all that stuff was so much fun because it was like, wow, as soon as we release this, everybody in the world is going to be able to experience this. I wonder if they're going to like it. I mean, that's how we felt.
Wow.
But of course, I thought I was good. I had played the game for a solid year, and I was good at driving the Warthog, and I was good in multiplayer, and I could kill people. And then we let it go out into the world, and within a week, by the time I started seeing the kids who were playing it and how good they got at it or what videos they would upload of the crazy things they were doing, I was just like, okay, this has nothing to do with my, I can't compete with these kids now. It's gone. By the time, the Xbox Live came out during our Halo 2 days, I just couldn't believe how good everybody was. They were so good. So
wow.
Yeah, but that was fun. It was fun to be one of the best 30 players of Halo in the world for a little moment in time.
And then people out there
only were 30 players. Yeah.
Yeah. And then strangers in the world are doing red versus blue videos sooner or later, and it's all over.
Oh yeah.
Let's keep playing the video, and I have one more question for you, Marty. This first Halo title was just so iconic, and I think will forever be remembered as one of the most important games ever made. What do you hope the lasting legacy is of your work on this project?
Well, yeah, I'm starting to think about that. I asked a question the other day, which is, what's more important to you about Halo music? Is it the music itself or how it was used? And that started a sort of very interesting conversation. In my mind, I think the most important thing is how it was used. And I know that the music itself can be important, but I feel like if good music is used badly, then the music is no good. I mean, it's like people will not remember the music if it's implemented poorly. And sometimes very simple tracks that would probably not stand out on their own, but because they were used in a context that had some emotional impact for players, that when they hear it again out of that context, they can't divorce themselves from that initial emotional reaction. And then the music becomes elevated outside the game, but only because of the game. I mean, I owe so much of why people enjoy the music separately, because they also enjoyed it. Somehow it spoke to them while they were playing the game. So I guess that's what I would hope my legacy is, especially talking to other composers and game designers, is that, you know, the importance of implementing music the right way, of having music work inside your product in a really compelling way is so important. And you'll get mileage out of that you won't get just by going out and hiring some great composer and then just throwing it at a game. It's got to be really integrated. That's how you get the nostalgia factor 20 years later. That's what I think.
Mm-hmm. That's a fascinating point of view. Yeah, and very true. Marty, I just want to thank you so much for your time. This is such a treat to talk with you this many years later about all your work and what went into this really special game. Thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate it. Eric. It's nice to meet you, and it's nice to meet someone who's like paying attention this closely to something that we did 22 years ago. I appreciate it.
Oh, it stands the test of time, and it's quite important and really just wonderful to go back through it all with you and what went into this game.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marty, and thank you everyone for tuning into this edition of MPSE Designing the Game Cinematic. We will chat with you next time.